Hello and welcome to Retro Tech Retreat with Mr. H. Last time we looked at this Garrard SP25 Mk3 record deck. What we found was that this fully automatic record deck wasn't fully automatic anymore. So we had to clean everything off, degrease, then lubricate and restored all the automatic features to the deck. What I'm now going to do today is check the settings on the deck to make sure we get the best out of it. So let's take a look at setting this thing up. The Garrard SP25's got a very simple speed setup. The motor has a fixed speed. The only way you have any control over the accuracy of the speed is by adjusting the idler wheel position on the step drive spindle. And what we're aiming for is that when that wheel engages with the step spindle for the relevant speed, then it runs centrally. Underneath the deck and amongst all those mechanics there is, the service manual calls it a blade, a bit of sprung steel, which engages with a spindle below the idler wheel and lifts the wheel up and down a fraction. It is really awkward to adjust. I've got it set to 45, so if I just, I've got no power on at the moment, if I just turn it to manual now, and you should be able to see that that is about central in that step there. If I put it onto 33, it goes to the next one, and again it's roughly in the centre. The face of the idler wheel is quite thick, so it covers a fair spread, and that's really the best that we can do with the speed adjustment on this. The other thing to be aware of, as I mentioned before when we were stripping this deck down, is to make sure the surfaces of the rubber wheel, the surfaces of the step spindle and the inner drive surface of the platter are all free of grease and oil to avoid slippage. So I don't think there's any other adjustments we can do on that. Just about as good as it's going to get for this particular model of deck. One of the simplest ways of checking whether our platter is rotating at the correct speed is to use a strobe disk such as this. I found this as a free download on the internet, and it has 3 strobe circles, one for 78 RPM, one for 45 and one for 33 1/3. What you need to use these is an ordinary mains powered light, so in the UK here 50 Hz. Shine it onto the disc, start up the motor at the speed you want to check. At 45 RPM we're looking at the middle of the 3 strobes. If the platter is running at the correct speed, the strobe for that speed should look stationary. The technique you need to use is to adopt a middle distance stare, is the best way I can describe it. Looking at the strobe that you're interested in, and if that strobe appears to be stationary, then you're spot on the speed. If there's a slight difference, you'll probably see the strobe very slightly moving off in one direction or the other, depending on whether it's running fast or slow. Well, we can see here that with the 45 RPM it's not quite perfectly stationary, but for a deck of this quality with as few adjustments as there is, then that is probably the best that we can do. So some key components of the tone arm are the counterbalance weight, which is here, and that knurled screw is what tightens it to the tone arm that comes along here. So that's quite a coarse adjustment on there. There's quite limited movement of it as well. Another key adjustment is the stylus force dial, which is here, graduated in grams and half grams. And then another control is the bias compensator control, which is this little lever down here. And what that does is it compensates for small side forces acting on the pickup arm. And generally the setting is, if for example if the stylus force is set to 1 gram, then you'd set that bias compensator to number 1 as well. So those are the adjustments for stylus pressure. Let's have a look at the adjustments for positioning the stylus when the arm is cued onto the record. This screw tucked right underneath here, that is the pickup auto lowering position adjustment screw. That's the screw that gives the fine adjustment how far into the record the tone arm moves when you're using auto cueing. It's a very fine adjustment, factory set, So generally, unless there's been some sort of trauma, you shouldn't need to make any adjustment to that. Two more fine adjustments available are all to do with the queuing height. Down here, you should be able to just see, tucked inside there is a tiny grub screw. And that is the pickup queuing height adjustment screw, which again is another factory setting. And then the pickup auto height adjustment screw is this one here, that screw there. And if I can just lift the arm, you should see a plate come up as it lifts the arm up. So you can see that plate rising there, and it picks up the arm and then lowers it down again. The other thing I just wanted to show is it's the Garrard cartridge carrier. This was a system that they devised to make it simpler for changing cartridges, and what happens is if I can just get in there to show, you can see that this slides out like that, and there's your cartridge mounted. You can see the stylus just slots in the end there. Two screws hold it in, and then all the adjustments you can make in terms of angle and height of the actual stylus and cartridge you can do by slotting little shims inside there. The idea is it makes it easier to change cartridges without having to get into too much fiddly wiring. This has got the original Goldring 800 on it, which still seems to be working. At the time the Garrard SP25 Mk3 was manufactured, it was difficult, if not impossible, to obtain highly accurate stylus force gauges, particularly at a budget price. So Garrard produced their own, called the SBG3. It's a mechanical stylus force gauge. It comes with a 5-gram brass calibration weight, which I tested on a modern digital scale, and it is exactly 5 grams. You use the calibration weight to zero the gauge before use. Once that's set up, you then put it on the platter, carefully place the stylus into the little plastic cup and adjust the tone arm balance to give you the required stylus pressure. Clearly, because the gauge is mechanical, there's going to be some friction in the hinges, which inevitably will affect the result. So as I found when I adjusted this tone arm, the force measured by the SP3 gauge was out by about 2 grams from the dial setting on the tone arm. So not particularly good. Okay, so what have we found out today? Although this is a budget record deck, there are some adjustments available to give it the best performance we can get from it. As far as the speed of the platter is concerned, there's not much we can do to adjust it. We can check it to make sure that it is running at just about the correct speed. If it's running slow, it could be due to oil or grease on the step spindle, the idler wheel, or the drive surface underneath the platter. Other than that, there's not a great deal that we can do. So we checked that the idler wheel was running central to each of the steps of the stepped spindle and that all the surfaces are clean. As far as the tone arm adjustments are concerned, then yes, we can adjust the stylus pressure, although as we found using the gauge that the built-in adjustments on the tone arm are not particularly accurate. However, using that tool, we can at least set the stylus pressure to a figure that we want. There are other adjustments available on the tone arm that can adjust where it cues onto the record, its lifting height and queuing height and so on. But luckily this time we found that that didn't need any adjustment at all, but they are available should we ever need them. So we've done about as much as we can on setting up. I'm going to leave the original Goldring 800 cartridge in place, and then what I want to do is just make a few minor improvements to the plinth, make it a little bit more solid and sturdy. We'll talk about that when we look at the plinth in part 3. So if you enjoyed the video, please give us a like and subscribe. You can leave comments below, and I'll see you for part 3 when we look at the plinth for this deck. Bye for now.